The afternoon sun cut through the workshop's dusty windows as Clayton Cantor ran his finger along the spines of leather-bound binders, each one containing carefully preserved pieces of baseball history. His son, Everett, sat cross-legged on the concrete floor, 17 years old and studying for midterms, but his eyes kept drifting to the card spread before him like a treasure map. "This mantle rookie card," Everett said, holding the plastic sleeve up to the light. "Grandpa really knew what he was doing, didn't he?" Clayton smiled, though it carried the weight of loss. His father had died 3 years ago, a heart attack at 68 that came without warning. But before that, Vincent Cantu had spent 40 years building this collection, piece by piece, card by card. Not as an investment, though it had become one, but as a connection to his own father, who'd taken him to Yankee Stadium in 1951 and bought him his first pack. "He left it all to you for a reason," Clayton said, crouching beside his son. "Not because of what it's worth in dollars. Because he wanted you to understand that some things are about more than money. They're about memory, legacy." Everett grinned. "And also because it's worth a small fortune. Also that." The collection had been professionally appraised 6 months ago when they'd gotten it properly insured. $142,000. The number still stunned Clayton every time he thought about it. Card from the 1950s and 60s, in mint or near mint condition. Mantles, errands, mazes, Cowfaxes. His father had been meticulous, storing them in climate-controlled conditions, never handling them without cotton gloves. Clayton stood, stretching his back. At 43, he still moved like the college athlete he'd once been, though his sandy hair had started showing gray at the temples. He'd built a career as an industrial accident investigator, the kind of work that required patience, attention to detail, and the ability to see patterns others missed. People lied about what happened in factories and warehouses. Equipment failed in ways companies didn't want to admit. Clayton's job was finding the truth, no matter how deeply it was buried. "Your grandmother's coming over tonight," Clayton said, checking his watch. "Your mom invited her for dinner." Everett's expression shifted, becoming carefully neutral. "Which means she'll probably ask about college again." "Probably." Velma Snyder had opinions about everything, particularly about how other people should live their lives. She was 65, a widow of 8 years, and had never quite forgiven Clayton for being insufficiently ambitious in her eyes. He made good money, owned his home, provided well for his family. But he wasn't a doctor or a lawyer or a CEO, and in Velma's world, that mattered. What bothered Clayton more was how differently she treated Everett compared to her other grandchildren. Everett was quiet, studious, interested in history and baseball statistics. Velma's daughter Marcia's kids, loud, athletic, always in some extracurricular activity, got showered with praise and attention. Shelby's brother's daughter, a college senior studying business, was going places. Everett, Velma made clear, needed to be more like them. Clayton had watched his son's face fall 100 times when Velma compared him unfavorably to his cousins. Shelby, his wife, tried to mediate, but ultimately always sided with her mother. "That's just how she is," Shelby would say, as if cruelty became acceptable through repetition. "You want to put these away?" Clayton asked, gesturing to the cards. Everett nodded, carefully sliding them back into their protective sleeves. They kept the most valuable pieces here in the workshop, in a fireproof safe Clayton had installed. The rest of the collection stayed in a climate-controlled storage unit across town. Redundancy. His father had taught him that. That evening, Velma arrived at 6:30 sharp, a full 30 minutes early, letting herself in without knocking. She'd always done this, treating their home as an extension of her own space. Clayton heard her voice from the kitchen, already critiquing something about the meal preparation. "Shelby, sweetie, you're using too much salt. You know sodium is terrible for people our age." Clayton emerged from the hallway to find his wife, patient, kind Shelby, stirring a pot with rigid shoulders. She'd inherited her mother's height and dark hair, but none of her hardness. Shelby worked as a speech therapist at the elementary school, loved terrible reality TV shows, and cried during insurance commercials. Clayton had fallen in love with her 20 years ago because she saw goodness in everyone. It was also why she couldn't see how toxic her mother had become. "Hello, Velma," Clayton said evenly. She turned, her sharp eyes scanning him like a security checkpoint. Velma had been beautiful once. You could see it in old photographs. Now her face had hardened into something that resembled disapproval in its resting state. She wore expensive clothes, always expensive clothes, though she complained constantly about being on a fixed income. "Clayton, you're home early. It's 6:30. I'm always home by 6. She turned back to Shelby. "Where's Everett?" "Not hiding in his room, I hope. The boy needs to learn social skills." "He's finishing homework," Shelby said quickly. "He'll be down soon." Dinner was the excruciating ritual Clayton had learned to endure. Velma dominated the conversation, talking about Marcia's children, how Troy had made varsity football, how Stacy had gotten a lead in the school play. She talked about her other son Gerald's daughter, Priscilla, who'd just gotten an internship at a prestigious marketing firm. "A real go-getter, that one," Velma said, loading her fork with mashed potatoes despite her earlier comment about sodium. Not afraid to put herself out there. You know what the business world respects? Confidence. Everett ate silently, pushing food around his plate. "Speaking of which," Velma continued, "Everett, have you thought any more about which colleges you're applying to?" "Yes, Grandma. I got my list pretty much set." "And? Are you aiming high?" "Because, Priscilla got into Stanford." "Of course. She worked very hard for that. Extra tutoring, volunteer work, leadership positions." "Everett volunteers at the library," Shelby offered, "and he's maintained a 4.0. A library." Velma's laugh was dismissive. "Well, that's nice. But when admissions officers are looking at applications, they want to see initiative, entrepreneurship, not just sitting around reading old books." Clayton felt his jaw tighten. He set down his fork carefully. "The library program ever volunteers for teaches literacy to underprivileged kids. He's there 12 hours a week. I'd say that shows plenty of initiative." Velma waved her hand. "Oh, I'm sure it's fine. I'm just saying, in this competitive environment, fine isn't going to cut it." The rest of dinner passed in tense politeness. When Velma finally left at 9, practically pushing past Shelby's attempts to send her home with leftovers, Clayton found Everett in the workshop, sitting beside the safe. "She doesn't mean anything by it," Everett said quietly. Clayton sat down beside him. "Yes, she does. And I'm sorry you have to deal with it. Mom always defends her. Your mom loves her mother. It's complicated." Everett was quiet for a moment. "Sometimes I think about selling the collection, using the money for college, so I wouldn't need student loans. So nobody could say I didn't earn my way." Clayton put his hand on his son's shoulder. "Don't let anyone make you feel like you have to prove yourself through money. Your grandfather left you these cards because he believed in you exactly as you are. The value isn't in the selling. It's in the keeping. I know. I won't sell them. They're like having Grandpa still around. Somehow." That night, lying in bed, Shelby turned to Clayton in the darkness. "She really was harsh tonight. She's harsh every night. She worries about all the grandkids. She wants them to succeed. She wants them to succeed in ways she can brag about at her country club. There's a difference." Shelby sighed. "Maybe we could invite her over less often." Clayton didn't respond. They both knew that wouldn't happen. The following weeks passed in their normal rhythm. Clayton worked on a case involving a forklift accident at a distribution center. Driver error. But the company had failed to maintain the equipment properly, creating the conditions for disaster. He spent days going through maintenance logs, finding the gaps, the signatures that meant nothing, the inspections that never happened. It was similar work to what he did at home, paying attention, noticing when things didn't add up. On a Saturday morning 3 weeks after that dinner, Clayton came home from a hardware store run to find Shelby's car gone and an unfamiliar lockbox on the kitchen counter. He picked it up, turning it over. It was the kind professional organizers used when showing properties. His phone buzzed. A text from Shelby. Took Everett to look at colleges. Back tomorrow night. Love you. They planned this trip. He'd forgotten. Clayton texted back a response and started putting away his purchases, but something nagged at him. The lockbox didn't belong to them, and Shelby hadn't mentioned anyone coming by. He called her. It rang 4 times before she answered, highway noise in the background. Hey, honey, everything okay? Yeah, fine. Quick question. Why is there a lockbox on the counter? Silence. Then, Mom borrowed my key. She said she needed to grab something from the garage for a church sale. When was this? Yesterday, I think. I forgot to mention it. Is that a problem? Clayton looked at the lockbox again. Realtors use these. Estate sale companies. Not people grabbing a few items for a church fundraiser. No problem. Drive safe. He hung up and stood in the kitchen, that investigator's instinct lighting up like a warning flare. Velma had been here, alone, with access to the house. Clayton walked through each room, looking for disturbances. Nothing in the living room. Nothing in the bedrooms. The home office looked untouched. He saved the workshop for last, already knowing what he'd find but hoping he was wrong. The safe stood open, not broken into. That would have required tools and time. Just open, the door swung wide, the interior completely empty. Every single binder, every protective case, every card his father had spent 40 years collecting. Gone. Clayton stood there for a full minute, his mind processing what he was seeing against what it meant. Then, moving with careful precision, he pulled out his phone and started taking photographs. The empty safe, the lockbox on the counter. He checked the garage. A hand truck was missing, the kind with rubber wheels that wouldn't scratch floors. He photographed the space where it normally sat. Then he called the storage facility. Sure, Mr. Cantu, the manager said when Clayton described the situation. Your mother-in-law came by yesterday afternoon. She had your wife's key card and said you'd send her to pick up the unit's contents. We help her load everything into a U-Haul. Is there a problem? No problem, Clayton said, his voice steady despite the fury building behind his ribs. Just confirming. Thank you. He hung up and sat down on the workshop floor, in the exact spot where Everett had sat 3 weeks ago, holding that mantle rookie card up to the light. $142,000. 3 generations of collecting. Stolen by his mother-in-law while his family was conveniently out of town. Clayton didn't call Shelby back. Not yet. Instead, he spent the rest of the day doing what he did best, investigating. He pulled up Velma's social media accounts, started cross-referencing her posts and activities. He checked public records for any recent transactions. He called a buddy who worked in estate sales and casually asked about high-value baseball card collections coming on the market. By Sunday evening, when Shelby's car pulled into the driveway, Clayton had confirmed his suspicions. Velma had sold the entire collection through a specialized auction house in Chicago. She'd done it fast, 24 hours from theft to sale, probably to dealers who asked minimal questions when dealing with estates. The money had already been transferred to her account. Everett burst through the door, excited about the campus tours they'd done, and Clayton felt something break in his chest. His son didn't know yet. Didn't know that his grandmother had betrayed him in the worst possible way. Dad, wait until you see the engineering lab at... Everett stopped, reading Clayton's expression. What's wrong? Shelby came in behind him, bags in hand, and saw Clayton's face. What happened? We need to talk, Clayton said. All of us. Right now. They sat in the living room. Clayton explained it clinically, sticking to facts. The empty safe, the storage unit, the auction house, the completed sale. Shelby's face went white. Everett just stared, like he was trying to translate words from a foreign language. That's not. She wouldn't. Shelby fumbled for her phone. I'm calling her right now. Don't bother, Clayton said. Already did. Multiple times. She's not answering. Everett finally spoke, his voice very small. She sold Grandpa's cards? All of them. But why? That was the question Clayton had been asking himself all day. Velma was comfortable financially. Not wealthy, but not desperate. So why would she commit what amounted to theft? What could possibly justify this? Shelby tried her mother's number. It rang through to voicemail. She tried 3 more times, then started texting frantically. There has to be an explanation. Maybe it's a misunderstanding. Maybe she thought. Thought what, Shelby? That she could just walk into our house and steal $142,000 worth of property. Don't call it stealing. She's my mother. Then what would you call it? Shelby's hand shook. I don't know, but there has to be a reason. She wouldn't do this without cause. Maybe she needed money for something important. Clayton felt a cold realization settle over him. You're going to defend her. No matter what she did, you're going to defend her. I'm not defending theft. I'm just saying we need to talk to her first. Everett stood up abruptly. I'm going to my room. Honey, wait. Shelby reached for him, but he pulled away. It's fine. I just need to be alone. After Everett left, the fight continued. Shelby insisted they couldn't involve police. She's family. And that they needed to give Velma a chance to explain. Clayton argued that theft was theft, family or not. Around midnight, exhausted and furious, they went to bed without resolving anything. Clayton didn't sleep. He lay there in the dark, thinking about his father's hands arranging those cards, about Everett's face when he'd held them, about the 40 years of care that had been erased in a single afternoon. And he thought about Velma, who still wasn't answering her phone, who had planned this while they were gone, who had betrayed her grandson without a second thought. By morning, Clayton had made a decision. If Shelby wouldn't let him involve the police, fine. He'd handle this his own way. Monday morning, Velma finally answered her phone. Shelby had her on speaker, and Clayton stood in the kitchen listening to his mother-in-law's voice, calm and unapologetic. I was going to call you today, Velma said. I wanted to wait until I had everything sorted out. Sorted out? Shelby's voice cracked. Mom, you took Everett's baseball cards. Without permission. Oh, honey, don't be dramatic. I sold them, yes. And I know it might seem sudden, but I had a very good reason. Clayton leaned against the counter, arms crossed, watching his wife's desperate hope that this would somehow make sense. The money from those cards, Velma continued, went to pay off student loans. Troy's loans from his first 2 years, Stacy's, and most of Priscilla's. She's graduating this spring debt-free now. Can you imagine? The relief for all of them. Silence filled the kitchen. You used Everett's inheritance, Clayton said slowly, to pay off your other grandchildren's debts. Well, when you put it like that, it sounds selfish. But think about it, Clayton. Those cards were just sitting there. Everett's only 17. He doesn't need them right now. But Troy, Stacy, Priscilla, they're drowning in debt. I'm helping them start their adult lives without that burden. Isn't that what family does? Those weren't your cards to sell. They were just cards. Pieces of cardboard. I turned them into something that actually helps people. Shelby was crying now, quiet tears running down her face. Mom, you should have asked. You should have. Asked permission to help my grandchildren. From whom exactly? You all would have said no, told me those cards were too precious, too valuable. Meanwhile, real kids with real problems needed real help. Velma's voice took on that martyred tone she used when she wanted to be seen as selfless. I did what was best for the family. Best for 3/4 of the family, Clayton said. Funny how Everett doesn't count. Don't twist this, Clayton. Everett will be fine. He's got you two to pay for college. Troy's parents, my Marcia, she's struggling. Gerald's going through that divorce. I was helping the ones who actually needed it. Clayton felt Shelby deflate beside him. He'd seen this before. Velma's ability to reframe theft as charity, selfishness as sacrifice. She'd been doing it their entire marriage. We want the money back, Clayton said flatly. Velma laughed. It's gone, Clayton. Paid to loan servicers. It's not like I could just ask for it back. Then you'll need to find another way to repay Everett. Or what? You'll sue me? Your own family. Her voice turned cold. Good luck with that. Shelby would never agree, and you know it. She was right. Clayton looked at his wife, saw the conflict tearing her apart, and knew Velma had calculated this perfectly. She'd stolen from them because she knew they couldn't, fight back. We'll talk later, Velma said, and hung up. Shelby sank into a chair. She really did it. She really just took them. Yes. But helping the other kids, maybe she thought. Shelby. Clayton kept his voice gentle. What she did was steal from our son to benefit her favorites. There's no version of this that's okay. I know. She looked up at him, desperate. What do we do? Clayton thought about the empty safe, about Everett's careful handling of his grandfather's legacy, about Velma's cold dismissal of it all. I don't know yet, but we're going to do something. That afternoon, Clayton sat Everett down and told him everything from the phone call. His son listened without expression, and when Clayton finished, Everett said only, "She's not sorry." No, she's not. She thinks she did the right thing. That's how she's justifying it, yes. Everett stood up and walked to the window, looking out at nothing. I don't want to see her again. Is that okay? More than okay. I don't want Mom to make me forgive her. Clayton joined his son at the window. Nobody can make you forgive anyone. That's your choice, always. Good. Everett turned to face his father. Because I won't. Over the next few days, Clayton watched his family fracture. Shelby tried to mediate, caught between her mother and her son, satisfying neither. She suggested family therapy, which Velma refused. She proposed payment plans, which Velma dismissed. Every conversation ended the same way, with Velma insisting she'd done nothing wrong, and Shelby unable to fully condemn her. Everett stopped talking about college. He stopped talking much at all, actually retreating into silence that worried Clayton more than any outburst would have. And Clayton? Clayton started investigating his mother-in-law in earnest. He'd been curious before, in an idle way. Something about Velma had never quite added up. She claimed financial hardship constantly, but wore designer clothes. She said she was lonely, but refused invitations to family events. She posted endless social media updates about her active social life, but rarely had genuine friends. Now, with time and motivation, Clayton began to dig deeper. He started with public records. Velma's house, a 3-bedroom ranch in a decent neighborhood, had been paid off for years. Her late husband's life insurance and pension provided adequate income. She volunteered at a historical society and served on the board of a women's club. On paper, her life looked ordinary. But Clayton had learned long ago that what people showed the world rarely matched their reality. He created a fake profile on Facebook, a common enough name, generic photos, and sent friend requests to people in Velma's social circle. About half accepted. Through their posts, he started seeing a different picture of his mother-in-law's life. She traveled more than she'd ever mentioned. Photos from Miami, Las Vegas, Austin. Always staying at nice hotels. Always dining at expensive restaurants. She posted about girls' weekends that didn't include any of the women from her family. Mystery companions, faces turned away from cameras. And then Clayton found something interesting. A review Velma had left for a restaurant in Phoenix, posted 8 months ago, raving about the ambience and wonderful date night. Date night. Velma had been widowed for 8 years and, to Clayton's knowledge, hadn't dated anyone since. He searched for more Phoenix references. Found another review, this one for a hotel. 5 stars. Romantic getaway weekend, it read. Clayton's investigator instincts kicked into overdrive. He started looking at Velma's other online activity. She had accounts on Instagram, Facebook, even LinkedIn. But was her dating site profile, which he found after some dedicated searching, that opened a real door. The profile was under a slight variation of her name, Velma Schneider instead of Snyder. The photos were professional, probably airbrushed. She'd knocked 10 years off her age. The bio described her as a successful businesswoman and world traveler seeking a generous, mature man who appreciates the finer things. Generous. That was code Clayton knew. He'd seen enough of these profiles in his investigation work. They were looking for money. He created another fake profile, this time of a wealthy widower, and waited. It took 3 days for Velma to message him. The conversation started innocently enough. Where did he live? What did he like to do? What kind of relationship was he seeking? But within a week of back and forth, Velma was telling Richard, the name Clayton had chosen, about her expensive tastes, her love of travel, how she'd been hurt financially by her late husband's poor investments and was trying to rebuild her life. All eyes. Her husband had left her well provided for. Clayton documented everything. Screen captures, archives of messages. He watched as Velma, or the version of herself she presented online, skillfully manipulated Richard toward the topic of money. She never asked directly. She was too smart for that. Instead, she talked about opportunities she couldn't quite afford, trips she desperately wanted to take, medical procedures she supposedly needed. And based on the trail of reviews and photos, based on the expensive lifestyle she was living, Clayton realized she'd done this before. Multiple times. This wasn't a one-time thing or even a desperate act. This was a pattern. His mother-in-law was a romance scammer. Clayton sat back from his computer, the weight of discovery settling over him. This was it. This was the leverage he needed. Velma had built her life on deception, extracting money from lonely men, creating fake personas, exploiting vulnerability. And now Clayton had proof. He spent another week gathering evidence. He traced Velma's trips against her online activity, found correlation after correlation. A weekend in San Diego matched up with messages to a man from La Jolla. A week in New York corresponded to conversations with someone from Connecticut. Every trip, every expensive meal, every luxury purchase, funded by victims who thought they'd found love. The baseball cards? That money probably went to fund her operation, not student loans. Or maybe both. Velma would see helping her preferred grandchildren and fueling her scams as equally valid uses of stolen money. Clayton felt sick and furious, and for the first time in days, powerful. He now had what he needed to destroy her. The confrontation happened 3 weeks after the theft at a mandatory family gathering Velma had insisted on hosting. "We need to move past this unpleasantness," she told Shelby, who'd reluctantly agreed to attend. Clayton, Shelby, and Everett arrived to find Velma's house already full. Marcia was there with her husband and kids, Troy and Stacy looking uncomfortable. Gerald had brought Priscilla, who at least had the decency to avoid eye contact with Everett. Other family members milled around, Velma's sister, a few cousins, the assembled audience for whatever show Velma planned to put on. Dinner was catered, expensive food that Velma definitely couldn't afford on her fixed income. She held court at the head of the table, playing the gracious matriarch, occasionally throwing pointed comments about people who hold grudges and the importance of family forgiveness. Everett ate in silence. Clayton waited. It was during dessert that Velma finally addressed it directly. "I think it's time we clear the air," she announced, looking around the table. "Some people in this family seem to think I did something wrong by helping my grandchildren with their student loans. But I want everyone here to know I did what I thought was best. Those baseball cards were an asset that was doing nothing but collecting dust. I turned them into real help for real people." Murmurs of agreement from some family members. Marcia nodded vigorously. Gerald looked at his plate. "And I think," Velma continued, her gaze landing on Everett, "that some people need to learn that family means sacrifice. It means putting others' needs ahead of your own wants. Those cards were never really about you, Everett. They were about teaching you a lesson in generosity." Clayton watched his son's hands tighten around his fork. Watched Shelby's face crumple. Watched Velma's satisfied smile, the smile of someone who thought they'd won. He stood up. "Actually, Velma," Clayton said, his voice carrying across the suddenly quiet room, "let's talk about generosity and sacrifice and teaching lessons." Velma's eyes narrowed. "Clayton, don't make a scene." "Oh, I'm going to make a scene." He pulled out his phone. "See, I've spent the last few weeks wondering why you really stole from Everett. Because your story didn't make sense. You're not hurting for money. You live quite comfortably. So why? I already explained. You explained a lie. But I found the truth." He held up his phone, showing Velma's dating profile. Several people at the table leaned forward, curious. Velma's face went pale. "What is that?" "This is your dating profile. The one where you pretend to be 10 years younger, pretend to be a businesswoman, and target wealthy men for money." Clayton swiped through screenshots. "Here's you talking to someone from Phoenix about a loan you needed. Here's messages to someone from Chicago about an investment opportunity. Here's you planning trips with men you've been scamming." The table erupted. Marcia gasped. Gerald said, "What?" Someone else started asking questions, voices overlapping. "That's not. You can't prove." Velma stood up, her chair scraping back. "I can prove all of it. I have records of your trips, your expenses, your dating site messages. I know about Thomas from San Diego, David from Connecticut, Frank from Miami. Should I go on?" Clayton's voice was ice. "You're running romance scams, Velma. You've been doing it for months, maybe years. And I think the $142,000 from those cards went directly into funding your operation. Maybe some went to loans, but most of it Most of it went to maintaining the lifestyle you used to lure in victims. Velma looked around the table, seeing shock, disgust, confusion on the faces of her family. You're lying. This is a sick attempt to discredit me because you're angry about some cards. Grandma. Everyone turned to Everett. He'd stood up, his young face harder than Clayton had ever seen it. I know where you were last night, Everett said quietly. Velma froze. You told Mom you were at your historical society meeting. But I drove by the hotel downtown, the nice one on 5th Street. I saw you in the bar with an older man. You were dressed up, wearing the diamond bracelet you told Mom you had to sell to pay bills. Everett's voice didn't shake. You weren't at a meeting. You were on a date with one of the men Dad found. The silence in the room was absolute. Clayton hadn't known Everett had followed up on his investigation, but pride surged through him. His son had chosen to verify the truth himself, had gathered his own evidence. That took courage. Last night, Clayton continued, Velma met with Robert Harrison, a widower from the next town over. According to his dating profile, which I also found, he's got a substantial retirement fund and is looking for companionship. According to your messages to him, Velma, you're planning a trip to Napa Valley next month. His treat, of course. Velma's mouth opened and closed. This is invasion of privacy. You had no right. You had no right to steal from my son. Clayton stepped closer. But here's what's going to happen now. You have two choices. Choice one. I take all of this evidence to the police. Romance fraud is a crime. So is theft. You'll be arrested, prosecuted, and you'll spend what's left of your reputation and possibly your freedom, paying for what you've done. You wouldn't dare. Try me. Clayton's eyes didn't leave hers. Choice two. You contact every person whose student loans you paid off, and you tell them the money was a mistake. You set up payment plans to get every cent back. All $142,000 gets returned to Everett, and you stay away from our family. Permanently. That's insane. I can't just ask for money back. Then I guess we're going with choice one. Clayton started to dial on his phone. Wait. Velma lunged forward. Wait. Just wait. Clayton lowered the phone, waiting. Velma looked around the table at her family, seeing judgment in their eyes. Marcia had gone white, realizing what the returned loan money would mean for her kids. Gerald was shaking his head slowly, disgusted. Priscilla had started crying. If I do this, Velma said, her voice shaking, if I get the money back, you can't tell anyone about the other thing. The romance scamming? The fraud? Clayton shook his head. No deal. You come clean about everything. You contact every man you've conned. You return whatever money you still have, and you make it right. All of it. I'll be ruined. You ruined yourself. Clayton's voice softened just slightly. You had a choice 3 weeks ago. You could have been a grandmother who loved all her grandkids equally. Instead, you chose to steal from one to favor the others. And worse, you funded your criminal activity with what you stole. You don't get to walk away from this clean. Shelby had been silent through all of this, tears streaming down her face. Now she spoke, her voice barely a whisper. Mom, is it true? All of it. Velma looked at her daughter, saw no sympathy there, and something in her broke. Her shoulders sagged. I didn't mean for it to go this far. It started as just dinner dates, nice evenings. They wanted to pay for things. I let them. Then it became more, and I needed money to keep up the illusion, and she stopped, swallowed. The cards were just sitting there. I thought I could use them to help people and help myself. I thought nobody would really care. Nobody would care. Everett's voice was still steady, but tears ran down his face now too. Grandpa spent 40 years collecting those. They were the last thing he gave me. And you thought nobody would care? Velma reached toward him. Everett, don't. Everett stepped back. Don't touch me. Clayton put his hand on his son's shoulder. So what's it going to be, Velma? Police or repayment? You've got 10 seconds to decide. She looked around the room one more time, at the faces of people who'd loved her, respected her, trusted her. All of it gone in the space of one dinner. I'll get the money back. I'll make it right. All of it. Yes, all of it. And the scamming? Velma closed her eyes. I'll contact the men. Return what I can. Turn myself in if I have to. Clayton nodded. You have 60 days to get Everett his money. All of it, every cent, plus interest for the time it's been gone. If you miss that deadline by even one day, I go to the police with everything I have. Understand? I understand. And you stay away from us. From Shelby, from Everett, from me. You don't call, don't visit, don't show up at holidays. You're not welcome in our lives anymore. Shelby made a small sound of protest, but Clayton looked at her, and she fell silent. Velma just nodded, defeated. The gathering dissolved after that, family members leaving quickly, avoiding eye contact. Marcia left without saying goodbye, her kids trailing behind her in confusion. Gerald paused at the door, looked back at his mother with disgust, and walked out. Priscilla stopped in front of Everett. I didn't know, she said quietly, about any of it. I just thought she was helping us. I'm sorry. Everett nodded, but didn't speak. Clayton, Shelby, and Everett were the last to leave. At the door, Clayton turned back to see Velma still standing at the table, surrounded by half-eaten desserts and the wreckage of her life. You could have been better, he said. You should have been better. Then he closed the door behind them. The 60 days passed slowly. Velma, true to her word, began the process of repayment. It turned out the student loans hadn't all been paid off. Only Troy's had been fully settled. She'd given partial payments to Stacy and Priscilla, keeping the bulk of the money for herself, for her scams, and her lifestyle. Marcia had to refinance her house to come up with Troy's portion. It destroyed their relationship. Mother and daughter barely spoke now. Gerald made Priscilla get a job to pay back what she'd received, teaching her the lesson Velma never had about working for what you get. Velma herself sold off everything valuable she owned. The designer clothes, the jewelry, the furniture. She downsized to a small apartment, took a part-time job at a grocery store. Clayton watched it all happen through Shelby, who remained in minimal contact despite his wishes, unable to completely cut her mother off. She's trying, Shelby would say. She's really trying to make it right. Clayton didn't argue. Let Velma try. It didn't change what she'd done. On day 59, a cashier's check for $142,000 plus interest arrived at their house via certified mail. Clayton and Everett took it to the bank together, deposited it into an account they'd opened in Everett's name. What do you want to do with it? Clayton asked. Everett thought about it. Start a new collection, maybe, not to replace Grandpa's. That's impossible. But something that's mine. Something I build myself. I think he'd like that. That evening, Shelby came into the workshop where Clayton was organizing his tools. She'd been quieter these weeks, processing everything that had happened. The men, she said, the ones Mom scammed. What happened with them? She contacted them, returned what money she could. A couple of them filed police reports anyway. She's cooperating with the investigation. Clayton set down the wrench he'd been holding. She might still face charges. It's out of her hands now. Shelby nodded. Do you think I should visit her? Do you want to? I don't know. She's my mother. But what she did to Everett, to those men, Shelby's voice broke. I keep thinking I should have seen it. Should have known she was capable of this. Clayton crossed her, pulled her into a hug. You saw the mom you wanted her to be. That's not your fault. I chose her over you and Everett at first. I defended her. And then you didn't. You stood with us when it mattered. They stayed like that for a while, holding each other in the dusty workshop where all of this had started. 8 months later, Clayton and Everett stood in a familiar auction house. Not in Chicago, where Velma had sold the original collection, but in Boston where serious collectors gathered. They'd spent months tracking down pieces for Everett's new collection. Not the same cards Grandpa Vincent had chosen, but cards that meant something to Everett personally. A 1968 Willie Mays. A 1977 Reggie Jackson. Players his grandpa had talked about, games they discussed together, moments in baseball history that connected grandfather to grandson across time. The collection was smaller now, more modest. But it was Everett's, built through his own choices, his own research, his own money from the settlement. Clayton had insisted Everett keep most of the $142,000 for college and his future, but they'd allocated enough for Everett to start building something meaningful. At the auction, they bid on a 1951 Mickey Mantle rookie card. Not mint condition like Grandpa's had been, but still beautiful, still full of history. They wanted it $30,000, and when the gavel came down, Everett grinned wider than Clayton had seen in months. Grandpa would have loved this one, Everett said, holding the case gently. He would have loved that you're doing this yourself more. They drove home with the card secured in a special carrying case, talking about baseball and history and everything except Velma, who by silent agreement they rarely mentioned anymore. She'd become a ghost in their lives, a cautionary tale, a lesson learned. Shelby had eventually resumed limited contact with her mother. Lunch once a month, brief phone calls. Clayton didn't object. Healing looked different for everyone. But Velma never came to the house, never called Clayton or Everett, honored the boundaries that had been set. The legal consequences had been real. 2 of the men Velma had scammed pressed charges. She pleaded guilty to fraud, got 2 years probation, community service, and mandatory counseling. Her name appeared in the local paper. The Women's Club removed her from the board. The Historical Society asked her to resign. She paid for it all, in every way that mattered. One Saturday afternoon, a year and a half after the theft, Clayton was in the garage when a car pulled up. He looked up to see Priscilla getting out, older now, more worn. She'd finished college working 2 jobs to pay off her debts, graduated without the fanfare Velma had once predicted. "Hi, Mr. Cantu," she said hesitantly. "Is Everett home?" Clayton called his son, who came out warily. Priscilla and Everett had barely spoken since that dinner. "I wanted to apologize," Priscilla said. "Really apologize, not just say words. What Grandma did was horrible. What she did to all those men was horrible. And I benefited from it without asking where the money came from. That makes me complicit." "You didn't know," Everett said. "I should have questioned it. When someone gives you $30,000 out of nowhere, you should question it." Priscilla held out an envelope. "I've been saving. It's not much, $3,000 so far. But I want to pay you back. All of it eventually. Even though the legal stuff is settled, I owe you. Not as your cousin, but as someone who took something that wasn't theirs to take." Everett looked at the envelope, then at Priscilla. "You don't have to." "I do. Please let me." After a moment, Everett took the envelope. "Thank you." Priscilla nodded, tears in her eyes, and left. Clayton watched her drive away, then turned to his son. That took courage. She's still trying to be better than Grandma taught her to be. Everett opened the envelope, looked at the check inside. "I'm going to put this toward the collection. Maybe get something from 1985. That's the year she was born. Full circle. Your grandfather would be proud of you." "I hope so." They went back inside, where Shelby had dinner started, where the house smelled like garlic and tomatoes, where life had slowly stitched itself back together. The workshop now held Everett's growing collection, each card chosen with care, each one representing not just baseball history, but personal history. The history of a family that had been broken and had healed, of a grandmother who had betrayed them, and a grandson who had been strong enough to survive it. That night, Clayton found Everett in the workshop, catalog open, researching potential additions to the collection. He sat down next to his son. "You know," Clayton said, "when this first happened, I was so angry I couldn't see straight. All I wanted was revenge. To destroy her the way she destroyed something precious to you. You did, though. Destroy her. No, I destroyed the lie she was living. But the actual destruction, the loss of respect, the broken relationships, the legal consequences, she did that to herself. All I did was expose it." Everett considered this. "You think she's sorry? Really sorry? I think she's sorry she got caught. Whether she's sorry for what she did," Clayton shrugged, "that's for her to figure out. It doesn't affect us either way. Because we moved on. Because we moved on." Everett closed the catalog and looked at his father. "Thanks, Dad, for not letting her get away with it. For standing up for me. Always," Clayton said. "That's what family actually means. Not sacrifice for the sake of sacrifice. Not blind loyalty, but standing up for each other when it matters. Having each other's backs. That's what your grandpa taught me, and what I hope I've taught you." "You did." They sat in comfortable silence, surrounded by cards and cases and memories, both old and new. Outside, autumn was turning to winter, the first real cold snap settling in. But inside, in this workshop that had seen both loss and recovery, Clayton felt only warmth. His son was safe. His family was healing. Justice, in its own way, had been served. And somewhere out there, Velma Snyder was learning that some prices are higher than money can measure, that betrayal costs more than dollars, and family, once broken by selfishness and greed, can't be bought back at any price. The baseball cards, the new collection, Everett's collection, would grow over the years. Each card would tell a story, not just of baseball, but of resilience, of integrity, of a boy who became a man through the worst kind of betrayal and came out stronger on the other side. And every time Everett looked at them, he'd remember not what was taken, but what he'd built in its place. That, Clayton thought, was the real legacy. Not the cards themselves, but the strength to keep collecting them. The courage to start over. The wisdom to know that value isn't measured in auction prices, but in the meaning we attach to things, the memories we preserve, the people we choose to be even when others choose to be less. In the end, Velma had taught them all a lesson, just not the one she'd intended. She taught them that family means nothing if it doesn't come with respect, trust, and genuine love. That blood relation doesn't excuse cruelty or justify theft. That being a grandparent is a privilege, not a right, and one that can be permanently revoked through selfishness. She taught them, most importantly, that the measure of a person isn't in their ability to take, but in their ability to build, to create, to honor what came before and prepare the way for what comes next. Velma had been a taker. She'd taken trust, taken money, taken a grandfather's legacy, and twisted it into something ugly. But Clayton and Everett, they were builders. And in the end, builders always win. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there.